I've
Well,
been
Alex Pryor, congratulations on your appointment for the position of music director for the Eugene Symphony. It's very exciting.
Oh, it's so exciting. I'm just on cloud nine. I've been a very thrilled boy for a couple of weeks now. It's really of course it's exciting to be working with a great orchestra and to be doing fun things, but it's also really great to be joining such a special team that has such ambition and vision and really values the role of an orchestra in a community, which is kind of why I want a job like this in the first place.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you about that, about community and accessibility. But before we get there, your career already has been extraordinary. You were appointed, I think, associate conductor at the Seattle Symphony when you were 17 years old. Is that correct?
Just assistant, unfortunately.
Just
Well,
assistant. Okay.
doesn't really make a difference, but assistant
Just
is technically
assistant.
more junior. But yep, that's where I got my big kind of break and a wonderful orchestra and one I'm eternally grateful to.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background? What led up to that incredible appointment as a teenager?
Well, I guess I'll start from the beginning in précis form. I I fell in love with music through ballet. When I
Mm.
was 3 and 4, I remember going to both Russian productions on tour in England and English productions not on tour because they were in England, therefore they didn't need to travel to England, being there themselves, doing various classical ballets. And I was completely transfixed, and it was the whole sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, every element, the light,
Yeah.
the stories, the romance, the music, absolutely, the dance, costumes, everything together, the suspension of disbelief, the magic, and the way that it could elevate you and take you to another world absolutely captivated me, and I wanted to do ballet, and I went to a ballet school even, and uh, and I had this old Russian smoking indoors. I think it was already illegal then. Maybe it was just before. But 60 puffs a minute kind of wonderful Russian teacher who said to me, very bad body for ballet, but so musical, go do music. And and I took her advice because the thing about ballet is for better or worse, she's a cruel mistress, like if you haven't got exactly the flexibility, exactly the physical strength and so on and so forth, you just can't no matter how much you want to. Um, and I certainly do not have the flexibility for ballet, although it remains an art I love. So I went into music and I took piano lessons, and very quickly each piano teacher said, "Oh no, he needs someone a bit more advanced, a bit more advanced, a bit more advanced." And um, uh, but at the same time, when I was doing my piano lessons and or practice, especially during practice, I had a strong desire, inkling, indeed a realized and manifested desire and inkling to improvise. At the
Mm.
time, being a silly little boy, I thought, well, this Beethoven sonata is fabulous, but how about this chord here? And I feel
Oh.
like in the middle of this, we need a whole little Wagnerian aria. And so I was fiddling around with these pieces, and then I started kind of writing my own pieces, and that took over from piano. At the same time, I had quite the career as a boy singer. Those who wish to be amused can Google my name with the word O Sole Mio and find Meryl Streep being serenaded to by my 10-year-old
Oh.
self. Uh,
Wow.
and it was wonderful because well, Meryl Streep was wonderful. She was very kind, but singing was wonderful. Um, it was a way to indulge or to not indulge even, but to engage my some of my favorite aspects of music, which was opera. By the time I was 5 and 6, opera was my great
Mm.
love. And it's funny because it was all through Wagner, but Wagner and Mussorgsky. But the first Wagner opera I saw was Meistersinger, and I thought it was. I mean, I was 5 or something, and I thought it was the most boring thing ever. I just couldn't believe how boring it was. And I must confess, it's still not my number one favorite Wagner opera. I mean, it's a masterpiece, but I still don't love it as much as the others. And I thought, ooh, Wagner. And then at about six, I say I was 5 or 6, I went to Rheingold, and that absolutely blew
Mhm.
my mind and changed my life. Especially the brass section. And I later became a brass player when I guess I was 9 or 10 when I started playing horn and then trumpet. And I still identify as a brass player. I haven't played a brass
Okay.
instrument properly for decades, except for during COVID. I got a cheap horn for a few months and kind of thought that'd be fun to restart. But I still spiritually identify with brass, and I think orchestras can usually tell that within a few minutes of rehearsal. But um, So anyway, so singing and composition were joint, but by the time my voice broke, I had kind of dropped the singing, and it was great. I had experience singing kids' roles in operas, so I knew about staging and breathing, and that's really all played a great role in my conducting career. But composition was really what I wanted to do, and I won this competition to have my piano concerto. At the time, I think it was number eight. Now it's number zero. That's how these things go. Uh, Recorded in Moscow, but the conductor turned up completely off his head drunk. And lovely guy. He subsequently gave me lessons, mentored me. What, genuinely a wonderful human being. But he had this demon, and he turned up at the rehearsal drunk as a wombat, and he kind of said, "Oh, well, you better conduct it." And I said, "I don't know how to conduct." I was 12 or something.
Oh my
I think
gosh.
it was 11 actually. And so, but when you're 11, you kind of
Improvise.
lack of skill doesn't stop you trying. And the musicians were very kind and supportive, and my music was relatively simple at the time. And so it went rather well, and I got the taste for it, and a few other factors played in. My A few years later, my teacher at conservatory, I went to conservatory when I was 13 in St. Petersburg. My composition teacher, a certain Alexander Tchaikovsky, not related to
Mhm.
the famous Tchaikovsky, but nephew of a very wonderful composer, Boris Tchaikovsky. He said, Alex, you're really a very, very talented composer, but your music is quite, let's say, erudite. I especially at that time, I was writing quite um, let's say, not neo-romantic music.
Hmm.
And he said, You're never going to make a living from this," which remains
Interesting.
to be an accurate statement.
Right.
And to this day, he said, "So you better go conduct." And I sort of remembered the bug I got from that previous alcohol-related incident, and I thought, why not? And I had a wonderful teacher, and that's when I really dug into it seriously. And I had 5 years of phenomenal, very intense Russian style studies, which are, they're intense, but they're certain.
Yeah.
My teachers knew Shostakovich and Prokofiev, and even one of them Rachmaninoff, and like this direct connection, and uh, but brutal, pretty rough. And then 5 years later, I apply for the Seattle job, and to my surprise, I'm invited for an audition, and off I head, and the rest is history. I got that job. It was great. It was a great experience. I guest conducted a bit, and I got the Edmonton job, which was one of the best times in my
Mhm.
life. And then I guest conducted a bit more, and then I had a brief stint in Germany, and then I left that, and then here I am, really heading to
Yeah.
Eugene, and life flies before your eyes.
Yeah. I want to back up for a moment. You've mentioned Wagner several times. Even when you were talking about ballet, you referenced Gesamtkunstwerk, which is a
Yeah,
Wagnerian idea
yeah.
about the whole picture. I'm curious how that, I also know that, you've been noted for your interpretations of Tchaikovsky. You've mentioned Russian training, um, but you're leaning into the Wagner also. I'm curious how that affects your conducting style and artistic direction style, having that real love of Wagner and also this Russian influence.
That's a wonderful question, and Wagner really is. I don't know how people go weeks without listening to Wagner. I mean,
Ah,
if they're happy, I'm very pleased, but it doesn't seem like a possible option to me. And I felt that way for a very long time. Um, there was a few things to say. One is that on the one hand, I'm of the opinion that when you're conducting German music, you should try and make it sound as German as possible. And I mean that in quite practical ways, whether it's types of vibrato, what amount of portamento is tasteful or not, et cetera, like quite technical things that add up to the flavor, to the spirit. When you're conducting Russian music, you should sound Russian, and et cetera, et cetera. Italian, you should sound Italian. And, I've had conversations with musicians where, I was doing Italian opera with a wonderful German opera orchestra, and we said, well, this is our tradition. I said, it's wonderful. And I really cherish tradition. I said, how about we combine that with an Italian spirit? Because
Mhm.
still Italian music. And actually, that marriage is always very beautiful. And so there's that side. So, I don't conduct Wagner the same way I conduct Tchaikovsky or Janacek or Sibelius or Copland for that matter. But I always say I'm not a Russian person. I am a Russian musician. That's how I am. And so definitely Russian style, Russian flavor is a big part of me. On the other hand, I grew up on the Christian Thielemann recordings, and a lot of my mentors have been great Wagnerians, great Bruckner conductors in that style is very dear to me, but so is Czech music. That's always been a huge
Mm.
part of my life. Very special passion. Nordic music, in on and off, perhaps the greatest passion. English music and very much American music is a big deal for me. And I'm very passionate about promoting it. And I do a lot of American music in Europe specifically. And music has this incredible borderless effect, and I mean, Wagner perhaps is a toxic example to choose here, but let's say Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky's music may mean one thing to a Russian and another thing, to an American and so on and so forth, and probably a very different thing to a Ukrainian right now, right? Like music has a lot of feelings, and not all of them are positive, but the sum ends up being positive in the long arc of history. And that's okay, right? Like great music. I love very nationalist music. I love Janacek, I love Smetana, I love Sibelius, I love Nielsen, I love Grieg, I love Rimsky-Korsakov very much. I love Copland, so on and so forth. All these composers that you could put in the Vaughan Williams, you could put in the nationalist box, and yet their music is so much more than just a form of patriotism. It still speaks to eternal and mutual across the entire world human stories. If it didn't, it would remain a sort of parochial form of local, perfectly pleasant entertainment, right?
Sure,
But
sure.
so that international, that omni sort of pan-human uh, element of music is one of the whole reasons I like doing it. So knowing the traditions and then also speaking in a way that invites whoever's listening to it is kind of the formula that I try to follow, especially in terms of a leadership role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and leaning into that universality and accessibility. This is the 60th anniversary of the Eugene Symphony. You're taking over the helms as music director in this landmark year for the symphony. And I have read that a big part of your mission has to do with community and
Mm.
accessibility. Can you talk a little bit about your artistic vision, both artistically but also in the realm of this of accessibility for the community?
Absolutely. And the music director's job is exactly kind of what you just outlined. It is a musical job, and it's a uh, outreach, let's say, a public-facing job. Um, and I think some people have the impression that conductors sort of do it for the music. I mean, obviously we do it for the music, but then like kind of sigh and silently accept the part of doing the public aspect. But no, it's actually a treat. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. It's an honor and a joy to meet people, to hear about their music experiences with this orchestra, perhaps, or perhaps they've never been to the orchestra, but what speaks to them find those commonalities. Also learn the amount of music that I've learned to love through these kinds of conversations that has nothing to do with my tradition or upbringing or from country artists to hip hop artists to like just unrelated jazz is really meaningful and wonderful and enriching to my life. But you build these human connections, and that's an honor. And then when the concerts happen, I like to think of them as these really kind of, I don't know if informal is the word because they're still special, but very intimate, even if it's
Mm,
a big hall, a very intimate hang. Come and hang out with us with some music. And I like to take the music making at the absolute highest possible level of seriousness, preparation, every aspect. But the spirit in which we take ourselves as the performers, at least me, should be one of it's not that it's informal or light, but it's just honest and vulnerable, like any great art is. It's human and saying, like, here's
mm,
what I have to offer. I really hope you enjoy it. And then also listening to people, listening, what do they want from their orchestra, especially people who come from non-majority groups, and that those let's say categories for lack of a better word are very many, right? Like they include all the obvious and important ones that you might think of, but they also include things like people who went to the orchestra once 20 years ago and then decided that they didn't
sure.
like it. Like how do we like there's any you think of it, it exists. And speaking to those groups that aren't just our like absolute core audience is really important. All at the same time as, I think it's crucial to say, never losing loyalty towards and friendship towards your core audience also,
Mm,
because
mhm,
without
mhm.
them you're not who you are.
Yep.
And all of that adds up to, we adore our art. I know that a community is healthier and kinder and better and builds better young people, sort of citizens for the future when it has great art. And it's not just an orchestra, but an orchestra is a hugely important part of it. But it's every kind of art because it brings the best of the world to wherever you are and brings the best of your community to the world. It um, kind of shows you the very best of humanity, the most inspired, um, excellent, outstanding, awesome, beautiful, sometimes dark too, sides of humanity, and lets you kind of reevaluate yourself. Like, oh man, yeah, I want to aim for that, or I want to stay clear
Mm.
of that. There's music that teaches you that too. But most of all, it brings people together, right? Like, doesn't matter your background, your political views, your age, your story. When you're in the hall, we're all kind of there as one. Where this kind of almost like the what's that massive aspen tree? You know, the is actually one organism, and we're there to share in the best of our humanity and learn about each other. And I think usually it's kind of like that Dolly Parton uh, um, campaign that's going around. I've been seeing billboards about, see the best in people and find the
Oh,
best in
yeah.
people and get to know someone, you'll see something good in them. And I think an orchestra is a great way of doing that. And that's all in addition to I love performing, Tchaikovsky the way I think it ought to be done. But it really is both. Especially with a North American music director position. It's specifically what I wanted to do. I've seen the change that great art can make in young people's lives, in anyone's life, how it can alleviate depression, despair, how it can build friendships, romantic relationships. I've absolutely occasionally intentionally seated people together at a Bruckner symphony, and then you let Bruckner do the magic. And yes, I do mean Bruckner. Uh,
Yeah, I'm about
uh,
to ask you about that.
Bruckner
Bruckner.
9. It was my most
Okay.
successful matchmaking. They're still together almost 10 years later.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness.
and one of my favorite pieces of music in the world. So, all of these incredible gifts that we have the honor to give, and it's not like I'm this, special person who has this gift to give. I just happen to have the honor of being in the position where I can play a role in that with this incredible instrument that is the orchestra, absolutely the musicians who are, by the way, outstanding. It's a really, really, really good orchestra, but also the team, and the team includes, of course, the top admin who are really excellent in Eugene. It's a pleasure to work with them, but also volunteers, stagehands, drivers, spouses or loved ones of those performing and working who support. Like the tree of people who make all this possible is extraordinary. And it's really as I said at the beginning of this conversation, it's a privilege to be, to some degree in the middle of that and to give my all to continue the excellence that the Eugene Symphony has been providing its beautiful community for so long, and it is a beautiful community.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I've got one more sort of off the wall question, and it's just before I let you go. I've read that you are an avid fan of two things, geographic elevation facts and country music. Can you explain the first of those? Geographic,
Ah,
do you just keep those in your mind, just little bits of trivia?
I it's not something that I was necessarily aware of. I
It's
oh,
in your Wikipedia page.
the elevation one. Well, yeah. Um, so my manager actually pointed out she said, like, you're always telling me what the elevation is. I'm like, yeah, well, it's interesting. It's good to know. Like, I want to know. Like, are we going up or going down? And then it's
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
to compare, like, is this a high elevation but with like a lot, like the whole topography, like how is the elevation related to the
Sure.
landscape? Is it related to the wet? Because the same elevation can have very different feels to them, and
Oh, yeah.
that's kind of interesting to me. Um, Sort of, it's the same part of me that, as a teenager would sit on Google Earth, or before that, the previous applications, and like do street view of random places for
Oh,
hours and
yeah.
hours. I'm quite the Dora the Explorer. My idea of a vacation is getting in my car without any idea of where I'm going and just seeing where I get to. And it's because I like discovering, and it's, I minored in ethnomusicology. So
Okay.
I was
Okay.
going on lots of folk expeditions to the north of Russia, Estonia, to a lesser degree Finland, but that kind of that northwest or northeast Europe, northwest of Russia corner. And I adore, folk music, and the stories it tells and the way it connects us to our sort of more primeval past, shall we say, or primordial. And so I love that exploration, and to
That's
the same
great.
degree, it's fun to see about the world we live in. But so then I believe it was my manager who added that to the Wikipedia page,
I
and
think it's really cool.
quite
It
funny.
speaks to a curiosity, a curiosity about the world, which I think is wonderful.
Oh, that's so kind. And it's funny because I have a new friend that I made through a friend out in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which is a very beautiful place if you haven't been there. And um, we were kind of having that we met at a concert at the Calgary Philharmonic and kind of both friends of the same performer. And then we had sort of a more formal dinner, and then we kind of enjoyed each other's company and so blah blah blah. So I went to visit him out in Medicine Hat, and suddenly he starts talking. He's like, the elevation at this point in the city is 783 meters, and I said, um, okay, and I hadn't realized at that point that was in my Wikipedia. But I texted my manager. I said, "Did you do
Okay.
something?" She's like, "Uh-huh." Uh,
Oh, that's funny. So it wasn't like you'd
it was
found a
very
kindred
sweet.
soul. He just knew you dug this stuff. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah. But I was like, well, I mean, that's very interesting, but you're the first person who's brought it up to me to this extent. What's up here? Anyway, the other, as for country music, pardon me, I'm just getting over a flu here. As for country music, yes, love it. And as I've said, I know this is a bit of a cliche, but sometimes cliches are cliches because they're true. Not always, but sometimes. Like there really isn't a better or worse genre. I just don't think that's a fair thing to say. You can say I relate more to one genre than another. It speaks more to me. It's more relevant to my life. I personally, but there's no such thing as better or worse. I'm of the opinion, and I won't tell you which ones, that some genres have a greater degree of fantastic and less fantastic artists.
Mm-hmm.
But the fantastic ones in every genre kind of are all great artists, and it's stupid to categorize. So I happen to enjoy a lot of genres, but one that is very special to me is country music, and I listen to a great deal of it, and especially Canadian country music, and also I do love my shameless stadium bro country. And I don't know. I think it's the same part of me that loves exploring and loves North America. This is my home, especially the western half of the continent, in in both the US and Canada. And it sounds like the earth, like the land, like the smell of the prairie in the summer, and the light of the Pacific Northwest, winter crisp day that I love. And so it's personal to me. The other thing is that I can't drive and listen to classical music because I will have an accident.
Oh,
Which I'm on my own because I just feel the necessity to speed up if the music is speeding up. And don't worry,
sure.
I don't. I turn it off, but therefore I have to listen to something else. And often it's country music. But I also just like, I mentioned earlier in our conversation that for me, really the only absolute must in great art of all kinds of art is sort of honesty slash vulnerability, and perhaps
Mm.
both. Um, you can be there's great folk art of people who weren't formally trained, right? Like, and it's fantastic. I love it. The Folk Art Museum in New York is one of my favorite museums. Like, there's great art that's very academic. It doesn't matter. But what bad art has in common is that it's full of pretense and fakeness, and what
Mhm.
great art has in common is that it's full of honesty and vulnerability. Not saying that's the only thing you have to do, but it is a prerequisite. And I don't know if you look at any painter you can think of that you love, any composer, any current wonderful pop artist, Taylor Swift, whatever you think of her, the gal is kind of very honest in herself, and that's very appealing. And I think that's why she's so successful. It's true of great hip hop artists. It's true of Wagner, and that's problematic too. But nevertheless, it results in great orchestral and vocal writing. The philosophy is anyway less pleasant sometimes, but it's all vulnerable. And Tchaikovsky, screaming for freedom and love as a gay man living in a world where it was impossible. It's so vulnerable and raw and honest.
Yeah.
And I find that great country music is the same. Now, there's also country music that isn't vulnerable and honest, but you listen to Corb Lund, for example, or Ian Tyson, and it's just like you're meeting the nicest guy from like Longview, Alberta, in his cowboy hat, and it's always fun to wear a cowboy hat, and who also happens to be a genius, and then off you go off-roading on a dirt road where you can smell that it's about to be a thunderstorm, in early fall, and you can feel that it's your last chance to get up to the top of the mountains before the snow comes, and you hear it in the music. It's awesome. So I love it very much in the same way that I love all the other music I love. Yeah.
This is great. Alex Pryor, this has been a wonderful, rangy conversation. I
Yeah.
love this. We're so excited to have you here in Oregon. Eugene's not that far away, but
No,
I look forward to coming down and
please
see
do.
your
Yeah.
symphony. I'm also hoping to feature recordings on Played in Oregon, but we'll talk about that when you get
Yeah,
back to
I've heard
Oregon.
rumblings. All I'll say is that this is a really, I mean, Oregon is privileged to have at least two phenomenal orchestras, and probably more
Yes.
than that, but it's at least two that I know of, and it's really a brilliant orchestra, and it's not the first goal in my tenure, but I will be absolutely singing the praises of this orchestra around the world because it's an orchestra that's worth taking a trip for. Apart from anything, Oregon is such a beautiful,
Yeah.
wonderful place. The people in Eugene are so nice, but also it's funky and like weird in the best way, and awesome and like authentic,
Yeah.
and then the landscape is like I'm just at home completely. But I think a lot of people would enjoy visiting there. So like it's a place worth coming to and hearing a great concert. And I'm excited for the repertoire to come out tomorrow because we've got a pretty exciting first season. Some of it was set before I got there, although interestingly, the piece on the first concert that was decided without me is by an Edmonton composer. So there's a
Oh,
very nice continuity in my life.
yeah.
And but it's a season that celebrates it's a very positive program on the whole. There's a couple of very dark pieces, but on the whole, it's a very uplifting, optimistic kind of joie de vivre, sees life by the horns kind of program and setting up for I think some very interesting future projects. So everyone's welcome, and I would love to see you very much down there, and definitely to share our performances with the people in Portland. Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, again, we're delighted to welcome you to Oregon. We can't wait for you to be
yeah.
here, and I can't wait to come down and hear how you're working with the Eugene Symphony. So thank you so much for your time on this.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.